Lots of fights went down this past weekend. Saturday was a crazy night for those that were watching between the Canelo Alvarez Edgar Berlanga fight card, and then you headed over to just a couple, not even about a mile away, whatever it was, to the Sphere for UFC 306. Both those will be broken down in this segment. So let's get right to it. Starting off now, let's go through the Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga fight card. We got to start off with the main event. Canelo Berlanga. That was a fight that it went as I had expected, yet at the same time, I earned more respect for Berlanga than I had originally anticipated. When we officially heard that this was going to be the fight that was going to happen, I don't know how many people out there really actually would have thought that Berlanga was going to beat Canelo or have it even be a possibly close fight. Obviously, you always have the possibility of a potential KO of one shot or whatever the case may be. That's always possible, sure. But against somebody like Canelo, especially that has the chin that he has, nobody was going to bet for Berlanga for the most part, I should say. That being said, while the fight went exactly how I had expected, Canelo was going to dominate from start to finish. I will say this. I walked away from this fight having a lot higher respect for Berlanga. He made the fight entertaining. There's no debate about that. That fight was very entertaining to watch. He put out a good performance in terms of his heart was clearly out there. He laid it all out there. He has talent, and he was a guy that I look at after that and say, you know what? I'm confident this is not the last time we're going to see him on a big stage. Sure, he's going to have to go fight a couple more guys, boom stuff up, whatever the case may be now again, but he's going to be just fine. I think Edgar Berlanga has a very bright future in this sport. He's going to be a guy that, one day Canelo's going to not be fighting any longer. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's a chance it's going to happen someday in the future. And all of a sudden, those belts are all going to open up. Berlanga's right there as a guy that I think will become a world champion at some point in time. If he stays at 168, he could do that sooner possibly and move up to light heavyweight, and that could be something we see as well. But for myself, I look at that fight, went exactly how I had planned, as Canelo defended his WBA, WBC, WBO titles, and he obviously beat down Edgar Berlanga and a very dominant fight, just how I had expected. That being said, though, what I look at for this is we now have to start talking about what's next for Canelo. The expectation is going to fight like typical in May again will be the next time we see him. And there's a lot of fights you make. Do I even need to say the biggest one is that we all know we want? David Benavidez. If that fight happens, massive. Will it happen? I have got no clue. The one that I feel a lot more confident in happening is going to be the winner of the light heavyweight undisputed championship of the world between Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. That is the one that I really see him kind of keeping a close eye on, specifically if Bivol beats him because of the rematch aspect to that fight. And that's a fight that I would be just as equally excited to go watch, because we're talking about that being a potentially top 5 pound for pound list group right there. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to rank them. I would probably put them somewhere between 5-6, depending on where it all falls at that point in time. That would be a massive fight to make. The third one that people would say that they're intrigued in at least would be the Bud Crawford one. And there's been a lot of debate on Twitter recently I've been seeing of a possible turn and shift now where a lot of people are starting to think Bud will beat Canelo. I'm not going to make that turn and shift in mindset yet. But that still is a fight that a lot of people are intrigued in. Would it be, as I've said before, a massive headlining event of two guys that are regarded as probably two of the best, if not the best, guys of this generation? Sure, exciting fight to possibly go watch. However, the same train of thought, that's not the one I'm really keying in for in terms of the best fight to watch possible. I really would look at Benavidez or the winner of the light undisputed heavyweight championship of the world being the ones that I really want to see him fight in. I would love to see those two fights. Benavidez is the biggest one we've been talking about. Personally, though, I would love to see the rematch of Bivol with him. That is a fight that would intrigue me. If Bivol beats Beterbiev, becomes undisputed, and goes and fights Canelo, I do think Bivol will win. I don't think Canelo would get that win. However, though, like I said, this ultimately is a fight that we would all hope to see. However, I must point to this conclusion. None of us are certain what Canelo Alvarez is going to do. We've been wanting big fights for the past couple of fights. That's not what Canelo has done. I've been critical of that. I've pointed that out. So when May comes around, could he go and fight another guy that is young, up and coming, and is probably not ready to go fight him yet? That could very well be the case. Would it be disappointing? Absolutely. But as I've said before as well, he has earned the right to do whatever he wants to do to end his career. however he wants to fight, whoever he wants to fight, he can do it. It's just a matter of how high we're going to regard him then because of who he fights. So who knows? I know another rumor he threw out during the pre-fight process was Conor McGregor. That's a fight that, that I hope that does not happen. Let's just say that. I don't even want to get started on that one. Sure, in 5, 6, 7 years, go ahead, but not right now. On the flip side of that, though, let's go talk about who Edgar Berlanga should fight next. As I said, he showed a lot of heart, a decent chin, very entertaining fighter. He had a great pre-fight, kind of built up the fight a lot more than a lot of people probably originally anticipated. And he ultimately has a bright future. He's a guy that I'm intrigued to go watch. I want to watch him fight. I think he could be a guy that wins a championship eventually. So I'm definitely intrigued in that aspect. There's 4 guys I would love to see him go fight next. First up, Christian Billy. I want Billy to finally go fight a legitimate top threat in that division. And I think that would be a perfect fight for him to go see and fight. David Pacheco, would absolutely love to see him fight him. Munguia and Plant. Those are the guys I'm really keying in on. Would love to see. Particularly the one I see most likely to happen would be Caleb Plant. Yes, Caleb's coming off a win. And yes, Berlanga is obviously coming off an L. However, when we look at this entire build-up of the 168 weight class, Caleb Plant has been a guy that people have rumored as a possible rematch against Canelo. One fight that I do not want to watch, and we'll talk about Caleb in a few seconds here. But Caleb Plant would be an intriguing fight. I would love to see that one happen. Would be very intrigued to see what happens in that fight. And so those are the 4 fights that I see for Berlanga that I would like to possibly see him go and pursue next. But ultimately, like I alluded to, Edgar Berlanga is a guy that we're going to see him again. This is not the last time we see Edgar Berlanga. He has a bright future. You can't say he was not entertaining. You can't say that he didn't hype the fight the proper way. And obviously, when we go inside the ring, sure, the night didn't necessarily go where he made a statement in terms of how dominant he is as a fighter and upset Canelo. However, he showed great heart. His chin is great. And he ultimately is a guy that is young. He's got a bright, bright future. This is not the last time we're going to see him. And he will have a chance to be a world champion one day because he is talented enough to do just that. Let's go to the other fight that happened on that card that I want to get into. Actually, we're going to get into 5 of them, but the next one I want to get into, Erislandy, Lara, and Danny Garcia. The proper way to place that one was a very slow fight. Lara got the KO win in the 9th round in about one of the most Lara ways you could probably expect. It was not a highlight reel KO. It was I don't know what you want to call it. Whatever that was. Basically, Danny Garcia gave up and was not wanting to fight there. So Lara gets the win. He remains the oldest active champion in boxing currently. But I can't not say that he's not against the clock. He's obviously, the clock is ticking down his career. This was a fight that he decided to take. And in that taking, he wanted Danny Garcia. Was a much more likely opportunity to go fight as opposed to fighting Carlos Adames, who was also rumored to be the guy who's going to go up against. So when you look at that, Garcia was the win he got, and it was a much easier fight, but I have to admit, he is definitely against the clock. Who we could possibly fight next? Well, we all could point to Adames. It has to be him next. You get a unifying fight there, and that would be an intriguing fight. I do have Adames would be winning that fight if that occurs. However, other possible guys, and I said I don't really want to even say other possible guys because I think that Carlos Adames is the one that you have to make there. It makes no sense to do any other possible fight. But this weekend, we're going to see Hamza Shiraz. I like him a lot. You could possibly make that fight there. Shane Mosley Jr., Janabek, I know he's rumored to possibly be moving up a weight class, but if he stays there at 160, I could also see that one happening as well. As for Garcia, I'm not going to list any other guys for him to possibly fight. The rumors and people's belief, and I would not be shocked to see it happen, is that that's the last time we see Danny Garcia in the ring. He's already been a lot more inactive over the past couple of years, and, after that fight, he had an incredible career. There's a time that comes to a conclusion for every athlete, and I think that time is probably now because I don't see what else he's going to get. He's not going to get another possible title fight anytime soon. He was outclassed to the full extent in that fight, and I just don't see that being a fight that anybody would be intrigued in watching if he decides to go out there and fight again. So personally, if he goes and fights again, great, good for him, whatever the case may be. But I just don't see a reason for him to continue to pursue boxing because a championship odds are not going to be there. And he did not look very good. So Danny Garcia's career, I would not be shocked to see this be the final time of him being in the ring. Now let's head over to a fight that was probably the biggest winner of the night. I think it's fair to say that. That's Caleb Plant. I have always had tremendous respect for Caleb Plant. He is a guy that he has the right attitude. He has the right mindset. He keeps it 100. I think that's the best way to put it. There is no BS with him. He is all out 100 type of guy, and he's not going to be a guy that people is ever going to disappoint. He's entertaining. He's exciting in the build-up process. He works hard. He's a good fighter. He's a guy that's hard not to love and respect. And when we got to go watch him go out there and fight, he did not disappoint at all. What's interesting is that he goes out there against Trevor McCumby, and he gets the 9th round KO. But here's where I think the respect really was earned and gained in watching Caleb Plant fight that night. Because he was down in the very 3rd round, got knocked down, but he comes back and ends up dominating the fight from that point going forward. Now, he started slow. I will say that obviously it's his first fight in 18 months. It's probably expected, and you could see that. But he got knocked down. He controls the rest of the fight, and it leads to the KO, and he made a statement in that KO because it literally was a beatdown from the point he got knocked down to the time that he ended up KOing McCumby. It was an absolute beatdown. Therefore, when I look at Caleb Plant, he is a guy that can get big fights. People want to watch him, especially here in America, and he's a very, very well-respected fighter. You talk about Canelo, the love that he has for Caleb Plant just shows it. Canelo is a guy that I've always said, you can tell that he loves to be respected by others, and he has a great respect when there's respect involved in a relationship. And I think that's how life should be between people. And you could tell that he has great respect for him. And so that's one that, people have rumored. Could Caleb Plant go and have a rematch against Canelo? That's not what I really want to see, to be honest, because I think Canelo would destroy Caleb Plant in that fight, but it is on the table. What I would prefer to see, though, outside of the Canelo fight, would be going out there and watching Christian and Billy fight, Edgar Berlanga, as I've already alluded to, or Pacheco. I would also not mind seeing the winner of the fight that's going to be going down on Friday in Phoenix, Arizona, or Glendale, Arizona, my apologies, between Munguia and Baziaden. Those two guys will be going at it, two guys that are top contenders in this weight class. The winner of that, I could see Caleb Plant going and fighting. That would make perfect sense, actually, for that to occur. But any one of those fights, I would be all for and would love to go see. Let's head down to the Romero fight now. That was an interesting one. He got KO, lost his belt earlier this year to Isaac Cruz, and this is his first fight since that point. The best way to define that night's fight was that it was a very sloppy fight. It was not an entertaining fight. Yes, Raleigh had different signs. Yes, he looked good at different moments, but you're not going to walk away from that fight acting like Raleigh is going to go and possibly contend for a belt anytime soon. Just my personal opinion. He did improve to 16-2, and he ultimately showed that, he is still a guy that's, he's essentially one of those guys that's going to be a bridge or gap kind of guy. He's going to fill the void. I don't think he's going to go back for a belt anytime soon, but he's a good enough fighter where he's going to be able to make a name and be a part of other decent fights going forward. So what are those fights going to possibly look like for me? The one that I really do circle and I would like to see is Subaru Matias. I don't know if that's a fight that would make any sense per se for Raleigh, because I think Raleigh would get destroyed in that fight. But that is a fight that I do look at and say, okay, if Raleigh can go in there and beat Matias, that essentially closed the door on what Matias is capable of, a guy that people consider the boogeyman for a very long time, and then got beat down, upset by Paro just a few months ago. If he was able to go out there and pursue that fight, and Raleigh beats Matias, like I said, it closes the door on Matias, but also that does elevate him, where it does give you some optimism and say, kid, we possibly see Raleigh become a guy that is a contender in the near future again. I don't know the answer to that, but I think Matias would get that win ultimately, but it would be an intriguing fight. Two guys that are in the works and process of rebuilding their brand and their names up again. I also would not mind seeing him possibly fight the winner of the Jack Catterall and Regis Prograis fight. Now, those two guys, I know it's been postponed. I do not believe there's been a scheduled date as of this moment in time. If it gets rescheduled, then the winner of one of those two, or you could look at it and say either one of them would make decent fights as well. Also, you could see guys, Sandor Martin would make sense there as well. And also Albert Puello, that's another one I would not be shocked to see as well. So there's a lot of things on the table for Raleigh. He's ultimately building himself back up, but I don't see him being a guy that we're going to see contending anytime soon, especially in a weight class with as much talent as he's in. So let's go to the fifth and final fight that I want to break down from that fight card this past weekend. Esteban Fulton. Cool boy went out there and got a split decision. A very controversial fight. When you watch that fight, you could tell it was clear. He hasn't fought in over a year. Last one was obviously in a way back in July of last year. And he also moved up a weight class, and you could tell he looked a little bit bigger and out there. He wasn't not quite the cool boy that we're used to seeing out there, and it was clearly a factor in that fight. But there was a lot of debate that people were saying he was just given the win there and whatever the case may be. I don't think that's the case. I'm not going to buy into that claim right there, because that's not what I ultimately do believe. I think that when you look at that fight, he had 2 rounds in which were knocked down, or he had big hits by Castro. They had great shots, round 5, round 8. But when you break down every other round, Cool Boy was winning those rounds. So yes, if you look at the gravity of the impact on the body, yes, you could say and argue that Castro won that fight, but that's not how boxing works. And when that whole concept gets confused about, well, he took more damage than the other guy, it's a 12-round fight. If you really want to take a guy out, you got to knock him out then. That's how you get the win by power. Otherwise, you have 12 rounds. You got to win the majority of those rounds. That's what it came down to. So when I looked at that, yes, Cool Boy, he won that fight overall. Yes, it was a close fight. And yes, there was an activity. Yes, he did not look the best throughout the entirety of that fight, but he edged out the wins in most of those other rounds. But it was certainly a close fight. I'm not going to say it was a destructive fight by any means. However, what's next for him? Well, he's got a lot of stuff on the table he could look at and possibly decide upon. One that I want to look at is he just has to decide what weight class he wants to pursue it in. We know that obviously he was at 122 back when he fought Inoue and when he was making his run out for a little while. This fight was at 126. So is he going to stay at 126, move down to 122? That's up to him to decide. We know he's capable of that at 122, and I don't think it would be interesting because ultimately, here's the thing. Nobody's going to beat Inoue outside of a couple guys, and if he has to either move up a weight class, move down a weight class, something along those lines, there's not many guys at 122 that's going to beat him. Cool Boy, you could argue, is the best chance at doing it. I'm not personally going to sit here and say that I would have confidence in Cool Boy beating Inoue. I think Inoue would win again. So 122 seems almost like a pointless move to go back down. I would prefer 126. Therefore, you look at 126, well, what makes sense then? I know he was calling for a championship fight next. Could he get that? Sure. Wouldn't be opposed to it. I would like to see one more fight, though, before he gets a championship fight. Because like I said, this was not a statement win. This was a I'm back win. Look, I'm capable of fighting at 126. I won the fight. I did good. I recovered. I'm now active a little bit again. Got a fight back underneath my legs, ready to go pursue that. Now let's go see what I can do after this. And so I like to see a big upgrade in fights, but I don't want to see a championship fight yet. I wouldn't be opposed to it, as I said, though. Therefore, the guys I'm looking at, Bruce Carrington. Massive fight you could make in America. Bruce Carrington, Cool Boy Fulton. We'll love to see that fight go down. Bruce Carrington, for those that don't know him yet, he is a sky-rising, young, up-and-coming boxer. Very, very high on him. Luis Nery, he's now moved up to 126 and never fought each other at 122. Would not mind seeing that fight happen now at 122. Then the other one I would like to see, Ray Ford. Another big fight you could make in America. A lot of hype was going towards Ray Ford early in the year after his sensational last-second KO. He then got the Saudi money to go fight on a massive card in Saudi Arabia to go fight Nick Ball. You could argue, did he win that fight? Sure. The fact of the matter is he did not win it, and that's the result. Personally, that might have been a step up too early for him. He didn't get a massive beatdown. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but it wasn't a massive beatdown to the point of like a Shakur Stevenson or whatever the case may be. But I think there clearly was a standpoint where you look at it and say, hey, he could have made another fight or two happen before he challenges the guy at the likes of Nick Ball. That being said, a fight between Cool Boy and Ray Ford would also be huge for America because you have two sensational big names. The winner of that ultimately would get a championship belt fight once again if they want to stay at 126, whatever the case may be. And you also get an opportunity to say, okay, who really emerges from these guys? You get a top-level contender, as I said, and also a big fight in America. So I would love that one. If he goes back to 122, like I said, there's not a lot of stuff to happen that in a way is going to control that entire division. But other fights you could make, Elijah Pierce wouldn't be shocking to see have happen, or you could see MJ as well. That's really what I look at for what Cool Boy could possibly do. A lot of decisions on the table for him. Glad that he's back in boxing. Obviously, he's an entertaining guy to watch. We all like seeing him. He's had a great career so far. So he's got some decisions to make, but ultimately, that's what I want to wrap up for the entire Canelo versus Berlanga card that happened this past weekend. Great card overall. Now, let me just say this too before I transition to UFC 306. That was a situation that a lot of people debate about. I was even a little skeptic about. You have what was being proclaimed and ended up being the biggest UFC event in UFC history, just around the block, from one of the biggest cards in America this entire year. Was that going to work? How are you going to combat boxing, MMA? Who splits sides? Whatever the case was going to be. I made a tweet about this. I think it worked out great. There was nothing bad that happened. Both events were extremely successful. I know the numbers haven't officially come out yet. UFC is going to shatter records, and supposedly this was one of the biggest fight card numbers that we're going to see in quite some time in America. Not sure if those were just rumored. I think those would be confirmed by Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever the case may be. But when we talk about that, they were extremely successful that night. It created an incredible atmosphere after Imagine Las Vegas, but ultimately created incredible atmospheres to be able to watch at home. So I'm all for that. It was a great weekend of fighting overall, and I think that card was extremely successful. Now let's transition to UFC 306. This was another card that, okay, well, let me separate these things first of all. UFC 306 from a productive standpoint and the new atmosphere, everything that was established there was top-notch, was incredible. There's not many things that can compare to what happened. And the fight night leading up to the main and co-main event fights was sensational. Lived up to the hype, was amazing. The main and co-main event, this is, okay. I personally was not against it. I have great respect for all forms of martial arts, and I see the talent that we got to witness in the domination that occurred in both of those fights. However, I do see from a general fan that wants to watch action and KOs, that's not what you want any part of. I understand both sides of that. Not going to shame you for saying if that's the way you think about things. But there obviously was a lot of debate between those co-main and main event, and I can understand why, so let's break that down right now. You have the main event, which is what we're going to start off about. Merab, Sean O'Malley. This was as dominant of a win for Merab as one probably could have predicted. The scorecards, let me make this clear first of all, were atrocious. Only one that was somewhat reasonable, sure, I guess you can give him 49-46. If that's the one you want to say, whatever, I'll be okay with that one. 48-47 is blasphemy. I don't know how you possibly get that out of that card. There was not 2 rounds that Sean O'Malley won in that fight. And if so, I'd have to go watch film alongside the judge that gave that score to let me know which ones he won, and I'd be shocked to see how that was. And maybe he only saw like one hit that O'Malley had and forgot the rest. I don't know what the story was there. I don't see how that was possible. Regardless, I'm going to consider that as a complete beatdown by Merab. End of the day, doesn't matter. He got the belt. He deserves to be the champion after that fight. And there's no other way to put it. However, I will say this. I didn't get my preview out before that fight occurred. But when we looked at that fight, I was going to favor Sean O'Malley. I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you guys. I thought O'Malley was going to win. But there was only 2 ways I saw this fight going down. And one of those 2 ways actually ended up exactly occurring how I thought it would. Because there's only 2 ways that were going to happen. O'Malley was going to get a nasty KO like he typically does on Merab. Or Merab was just going to out-wrestle, dominate O'Malley from top to finish in the fashion that he basically did. Now, it was even more than I thought was going to happen, but essentially the whole game plan was what I expected to see happen. That's what occurred. So Merab's now your champion. Whether people like it or not, he is the champion. You can't take the belt away from him. So what is next for Merab? There's names you could list here. I'm going to say the one name and the one name only that I really want to see. Umar Nurmagomedov. That is the fight we need to watch. I think we all would be intrigued in that. I know there's a lot of skepticism about what happened after the fight because the whole entire post-fight interview by Merab was very excessive, was very long, and I don't know if he understood the questions, what was going on, but he pretty much blotched the entire hype up for that possible fight there, and essentially what it appeared as was ducked him in person. I don't think that's the case overall. I think he just was excited and didn't know what to say exactly, but that's what ends up occurring there. The only other option, and let me make this clear, I do not want to rematch with O'Malley. I don't even see rumors of that, but I don't want that. O'Malley needs to build himself back up. I'm going to get into him in a second. The only other guy I could possibly see is against Davison, Figueiredo. That one is an option for him to possibly fight next. I just want to see Umar. That's the one that makes the most sense overall. It'd be a stylistic fight that would match well, would be interesting. And I would be intrigued to go watch, but overall, those are only 2 names that possibly make sense. He's going to be the champion. And ultimately, guess what, folks? We let another wrestler get a belt. And so I don't know who's going to beat him for a little while unless you have another one of these wrestlers, which is what Umar could possibly be if he decides to go out there and that's the fight that happens. But regardless, we've got another wrestler now, and he's going to probably has a chance to hold that belt for a little while, just to be honest. Because Merab is very, very talented. You can't deny that, and I do like him, and I don't think people should be disrespecting him the way they are just because he's not entertaining. He is extremely, extremely talented. Let's get to Sean O'Malley, though. Today, he went on his podcast, and he said this, and I'll just quote this exactly. I probably won't fight for 9 months, 10 months, maybe a year. It's going to be a while. Okay, we see this happen with fighters quite often where they say they're not going to fight for a little bit. I do believe this one because it wasn't too excessive as opposed to what Izzy said a year ago or so when he said he's going to not fight to 2027 Well, he just fought in 2024. So it wasn't that excessive of a statement that he made. However, this entire situation for O'Malley had to be eye-opening. When you look at Sean O'Malley, he is an incredible fighter. Nothing to take away from him in that regard. There are certainly holes that were exposed on Saturday night that are going to need to be addressed. And this will not be the first time that O'Malley has taken a break before in his career. He has done it before, and he came back much better and improved after that last break. So when I look at this, I say that's a great idea. At the end of the day, we know that the UFC is going to have a slight enticing desire to get O'Malley on the big stage again soon. Now, he's not going to be able to go fight for a belt immediately, I hope not. But I could see O'Malley possibly fight a big fight and then get a belt to a championship fight belt opportunity right after that next fight. That's a chance to have happen. But here's what I'm going to say before I talk about what could be next for O'Malley, because he said he's going to take a year off or so. So I'll get into those names last. I want to talk about this, though. Let me give you guys a couple of perspectives to kind of chew on for a second here now. When you talk about Sean O'Malley, he's taken a very hard approach that people end up hating you for, but makes him a lot of money and is huge for the UFC, and that's the branding aspect. He has gone to extensive levels of branding, literally by the appearance of his hair, by his tattoos, everything, his Lamborghinis. His level of branding is to an extent that is pretty much the only guy you could possibly compare him to is a 6'9" level of the rapper from, what was it, 4, 5, 6 years ago, whatever that case might have been. And when you do that in the ways he is, and he essentially creates this persona that he's made for himself, it makes it tough. Not to make an excuse, he's chosen to do this route. However, you have to understand what he's taking it from. He is taking this opportunity where I'm going to make my name big regardless because of who I am, my brand, this persona I'm perceiving. But also, yes, I'm a very, very talented fighter. And when you put this all together, you create the Sean O'Malley we've now seen and got to know. Because it's a little bit different, though, that style of doing so, opposed to what we see in a guy, let's just use a recent example, Alex Pereira. He's a guy that he's grown a lot recently in his branding, but he's made his name because of walking out there and KOing guys and KOs of the years, time after time after time after time after time. It wasn't because of his name, his image that made him who he is today. And that's a lot of what O'Malley is. Obviously, he's extremely talented. That's led to a lot of his great success, but there has certainly been a large scale growth in his popularity because of his branding. Let's just make that clear. That being said, what I think occurred in this fight was that he lost sight potentially of the balancing aspect of how to do so. And I get it. It's not easy to do that. But he obviously was doing so much of the promotion work. He was doing so much of enticing people to go watch this fight. He was doing so much of a standpoint of saying, you know what? Look at me. I'm taking on this brand. I'm going to headline the biggest fight in UFC history. I should say card in UFC history in terms of it being out of the sphere. Obviously, not the big. It was never the biggest fight, but this was not something that was easy to take on and handle. And I think he lost sight of the main goal at hand, which was to be a championship fighter, or I would hope is the main goal for himself. And so I will admit a lot of things have to change, because if he wants to become a championship fighter again, he's going to have to make some adjustments. If he goes out there and wants to fight Merab right away, he's going to get dominated outside of a lucky KO. And when we look at the fight, he didn't look like himself out there. He just didn't. I don't know what happened. He looked like he was slow. It looked like he was a little bit, it just wasn't himself out there. And I don't know if that was because he was intimidated. He didn't know how to get a move off of Merab or what the case may be. But regardless, it was utter domination through that entire fight. And that's what I really want to emphasize with this, because when you talk about him, he's going to have to make a lot of changes if he wants to get that belt back. And it's going to take a lot of development for himself. What I will admit to is this, though. This is my one piece of advice I like to look at when I talk about Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley is unique because of who he is as a fighter. He's branding and everything alongside that has been sensational, has been massive in driving who he is today. But the one thing I will say that I have been concerned about is the extent to which he decides to go out in pursuit of the Conor McGregor comparison. There will never be another Conor McGregor. There might be another big name, but there will never be another Conor McGregor. God made each and every single one of us special and unique in our own individual ways. When we try to copycat one person or another, it's losing your uniqueness. And at fault for that is partially him, it's partially UFC, it's partially the media. Because the comparisons were clearly there from a understanding of the sport and branding aspect, but there was too much of an emphasis on you're the next Conor McGregor, go be the next McGregor. Sean O'Malley is not the next Conor McGregor. He is Sean O'Malley. The whole being the next something it makes no sense at all. Sean O'Malley does not need to go pursue being the next Conor McGregor. He needs to pursue being the next and the only Sean O'Malley. And when you start trying to, I make yourself to such an extent that you are essentially in line and exactly like Conor McGregor, it loses a lot of your talent. It takes away from that. And I think that's something that if he reflects on in the next 9 months to a year, whatever it might be, I think he's going to see that himself. And he is such a talented fighter where if he just takes on this branding and makes himself Sean O'Malley, and whatever the highest potential aspect and component of Sean O'Malley that is, that will be what allows him to reach the highest potential of himself. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what changes exactly he's going to have to make. I don't know everything he's going to do. He has to figure that out. But he doesn't have to be Conor McGregor 2.0. He needs to be himself. And the constant questions of I'm going to surpass him, where Conor McGregor is at, just get that out of his mind. And go pursue being Sean O'Malley and who you are. So that's what I'm going to be intrigued to see what exactly ends up unfolding over the next year or so, because I think he's going to be back. He's going to be just fine, but he has to figure those things out. Now, I did say a few minutes ago, who do I think he's going to fight possibly next? Well, here's some names. Henry Cejudo, that's the one I want to see. You could also say Jose Aldo. That would be an interesting fight for him to return to. Corey Sandhagen, Peter Yan, those are all fights that you could see happen. Will it happen? I'm not positive, but those are the ones I could see him. I kind of zeroing in on to possibly go out there and fight when he makes his return, whenever that is. Let's head over to a couple more ones I want to get into on this UFC 306 card. Valentina Shevchenko was just about as dominant. No, I'm not going to say just about. She was more dominant in her win against Alexa Grasso than the Sean O'Malley disaster that happened there. This was another fight that rightfully, it was so dominant that at least the judges all got this one right as well. 50-45 all around. She dominated the win, not even close. We do not need number 4, and let me make that very clear. They need to go their own separate ways and pursue whatever that's going to look like. That's all I'm going to leave that fight at right then and there. Next up, Diego Lopes, Brian Ortega. Diego Lopes solidified himself Saturday night as a legitimate contender. He has now moved into the top 3, rightfully deserved, and he has now made what is a sensational group right there at that weight class. That weight class is going to be a premier division. The names there are huge, massive fights to make. Let me add this. Diego Lopes is the guy that has now solidified himself, though, to be a guy that could emerge from that group as a possible unified, undisputed champion of the world. That would not shock me to see Diego Lopes having that belt around his waist at one point in time. He made a statement. Not a statement in which I think we could look at and say, hey, Brian Ortega just got beat down. No, Ortega was decent. Didn't have his best night. Was decent. But Lopes showed that he is that guy. We already know he's willing to fight literally anywhere, anytime, any place. And then he goes out there against Ortega, who was supposed to fight just a couple months ago, and it was not a close fight at all. He's a legitimate contender, and what I would like to see have happen is, I just said, this is a loaded group that you could look at to fight. You could see this, Max Ilya winner. You could see Volk. You could see one of these big fights have happen, and they would be mega fights to see occur. And as I said, all those guys would be huge to watch there. Diego Lopes, him emerging from that group as a champion one day would not shock me at all. Now let's flip over to Brian Ortega, though. Was not the night that he wanted to have happen and wanted to occur. It is what it is, though. And it's unfortunate, but he does have a potential to fight some other decent big fights now in the future. Aljamain Sterling, that's the fight that I like to see. Josh Emmett, you could see that one. And you could also see Dan Ige. Obviously, it would be a unique way that all came to fruition because of the fact that, we all had Diego Lopes, Ige. Ige saved Ortega, then having those two guys come together and fight would not be something that I'm opposed to at all. So that's what I see for Brian Ortega, but obviously it was not the best night for Ortega. However, he's still loved by a lot of people, and I think he still has some good fights left in him in the future. Now, we have to head over to potentially the fight of the year. This was sensational. Esteban He went out there and he fought Daniel Zellhuber in what was, like I said, potentially the fight of the year. It does not get much better than that. It was a split decision where Esteban ended up winning that fight, and he made himself as the face of potentially the biggest and best fight, or the best fight, I should say, not the biggest, of the entire year. Sensational fight, top to bottom. I don't have many words for that other than just that was an incredible fight that you're not going to see too many of those that are better than that one, top to bottom. Words would not do justice to that fight. Let's get to the last one I want to touch up on. Raul Rosas Jr. started the night off with a defeat against Aoriqileng. It was not dominant. It was not a destructive win. It was not a KO by any means. He went 3 rounds and he was solid. I will say this though. While it wasn't the best performance, those type of nights do occur. He's young. He's still developing. He's going to have a bright future. But what I noticed is that he is a superstar in the making. Now, that could be more so from a perspective of branding than opposed to just talent. I think he's very, very talented, but time will tell there. However, obviously him talking about retiring at 25 and all that, you would have expected a KO win or whatever the case might have been right away. Didn't occur, not against that at all. But the way he's able to get the crowd going to start the night off, the way that his fan base is growing, his following is growing, he is going to be a star in the UFC for a very, very long time, especially if he continues winning. And he continued that. End of the day, like I said, was it the best fight in the world? No. But did he walk away from that fight and he got the win? Yes. So overall, Raul Rosas Jr. made a good impression that night. And, he's a guy that I would love to see potentially have a much bigger fight, step up fight, and see what that looks like for the young 19-year-old prospect in the UFC.